Hi there, welcome to the third video that we're doing in anticipation of the upcoming crowdfunding campaign. You found us here in this lovely lit room. This is Megan's dining room where Matt has been busy shooting footage that we'll be using in the ARCS campaign. That campaign, by the way, launches next week, so this is probably the last designer diary that we'll be releasing before the campaign launches. We are really excited to share the game with you and the expansions and to talk about all that we've been working on. We are all about as busy as we have ever been at work. But thankfully, everyone's doing a great job. The games are doing well, and actually we have sold out of ARCS. We had planned on selling out of ARCS, so this isn't too much of a surprise. But because we are out of stock of the game in the United States, it means we have to start thinking about a new printing of the game. So thankfully, we have an expansion in mind, and we are going to be using this upcoming crowdfunding campaign to show you what we've been working on in the world of ARCS and also to help us reprint the game. So here's what we want to do with this entry. I want to talk a little bit about the outline that I wrote at the end of ARCS' original development, and I'm going to talk about some of the problems that were found in that outline and how they shaped our initial proposal. I'll talk about the initial proposal that Josh and I looked at, what we learned about how to expand ARCS even in just the past couple months, and then I'll be taking you through the expansion itself. So first I'm going to talk a little bit about the original proposal that I wrote for ARCS. Actually, Matt, you want to give it to me? I printed it out. It's in 2 sheets. Right there. No, there you go. Beautiful. Here it is. It's blurry. You can't find any text there. It's all right. I don't say anything embarrassing. So I want to talk about this proposal. It's 2 pages. It's not much, and I brought a surprise prop. The first thing I want to do is talk a little bit about this proposal, which was the last journal entry that I wrote as we were finishing the development of ARCS. And the first thing that I do is talk about how I introduced a bunch of last minute changes because it's a tradition for me to always play around with numbers right as we're submitting files. By the way, I think this is where I introduced the error that caused us to have to put the errata pack in. So I fixed like 3 small balance things, but I think I might have been responsible for screwing up that event card, and I'm sorry. Then after I go through that, I reflected a little bit on the project itself. I talked about the places where I thought we did a really good job, the places where I screwed up a little bit, and then because I was still feeling like I wanted to write, I wrote notes for an expansion. Now the expansion was really built around 2 products. I called it the small expansion and the new campaign content expansion, because that's the kind of naming juice I had left at the end of ARCS. The small expansion was built around the notion of the prequel game. And the idea with the prequel game was that you would play a game of ARCS, and then every leader in base ARCS had a precursor power. And the idea was that if you won as the fuel drinker, the entire campaign would be played with all of the players as fuel drinkers. So every leader had 1 power that would become a global rule. Maybe it would go in the edicts or just to be a global rule that would then inform the entire campaign. And so that was built right here at the heart. And after that, I introduced some new plot lines. And it's really just a list with some notes. And I would write, this is, I think, an A plot. I think this is a B plot. I don't really say that much about each plot line. Sometimes I flag little components that I think they might add. And critically, there was a design plan that was coupled with this. I went through this proposal with the knowledge that it was a lot of work to build these expansions, and I wanted to acknowledge that and figure out how we could think structurally about how we did design and development. Now, when I looked back at this content, I ended up scrapping basically everything but the plot list. There are all these funny things about it. So for instance, the very idea of the precursor game, the reason why we didn't do that is because it was going to require a tremendous amount of testing. The problem with the prequel game is to validate it, you need to first design a bunch of prequel powers that can be used to seed an entire campaign, and then you have to play campaigns with all of those prequel powers. It was probably a valid form of play, but it wasn't something that we had room to do at the very end of ARCS' testing. Some of the campaign content, I have notes for the High Priest and the Reformer. These were all plot lines that we had done drafts of, but we didn't actually have time to finish during the original development of ARCS. So they got scrapped, set aside, and lived at the end of this long document for a while. I don't think I need this on the table anymore, so it's gonna go there. So when I set about working on the new expansion, the first thing I did is I started a fresh document and I wrote a proposal of everything that I thought we could possibly add to ARCs. So this started with things like the prequel game and guild cards and lore cards, but it also introduced other things. So I looked at the possibility of maybe doing a modular map. I really wanted to imagine how wide the space was for ARCs. And for this proposal, I didn't have any sense of product design. I decided to go in and basically treat it like a big list. When I got to an element of the game that I thought was a coherent unit, I would give it a proper header, I would type a few notes about what I could imagine as an alternate guild deck, for instance, or a package of leaders. And then once I had that proposal written out, I pressed return, went to a new paragraph, and started a new module. And then I did something that is a little unusual. I decided to invite Josh into the Google Doc and had a meeting where we went through the content together. Now, normally I wouldn't do this. I find that in the early stages of a project, I work really hard to do the core design work, at least a first pass of everything by myself, because I want to make sure that the arguments of the game, its design voice, are really coherent. But ARCs is special, and it's special for a couple reasons. I mean, first of all, we're talking about an expansion. This is a game that's already designed. Many of the arguments that ARCs makes as a design, they're already happening. I'm not worried about them getting diluted. And the other issue, or the other element, of course, is that Josh had been there for the creation of the original game. He's a fantastic collaborator, and he contributed immeasurably to the design of the campaign. I think he and I share a content credit on the ARCs campaign that is so richly deserved. And there are whole systems, such as the taxation system and some of the imperial politics, that really bear his mark. I mean, they are places where he was able to fix problems that had stumped me for months and really take ownership of those systems. This is not the kind of relationship that's born overnight. Josh and I at this point have been working together for years. And so even though I was doing something strange and inviting him into development in a very early stage of the process, it's less strange in the context of someone that I've worked with for a long time. So our basic approach here was that we would each take some solo time to work through the elements of the game that we were flagging. So Josh took about half of the objects, I took the other half, and we thought in a couple weeks we'd get back together and we'd sort of compare notes. So when we got together about a week later, it was pretty clear that we had plenty of material for a new expansion. And some of what we discovered in that initial week, I mean, we're only talking about a week or maybe 10 days of effort, would basically set the pattern for the expansion that we'd end up building. The good news was that ARCs was proving really robust. You know, we had built this game to be able to be expanded, and based on the initial labor, it seemed like it was bearing all the weight that we could put on it. It was also revealing whole sections of possibilities for expansion, which we had not even thought about. So in the design notes that I had written initially, I didn't really provide room for new concepts to be added, but the more we worked, the more we realized that there were entire modes of play that we basically hadn't even considered that seemed eminently expandable. So let me give you a kind of small example of this. When we were working on the expansion, I realized that I didn't have a card type that I needed. So what I wanted was like an object, like an artifact. The idea was the object should be stealable, so that's a card that has keys on it. Okay, that makes sense. But I didn't want it to go away with outrage, so it couldn't be a guild card. In other words, the original game didn't provide me with a card template that I could use to design, an old book that has some kind of mysterious power or special weapon. I needed a new card type. And that new card type doesn't really add that much complexity to the game, and it opens up the game's expressive space really organically, because it's addressing an issue that was sort of like latently present in the game. We also realized that we had learned a lot about how fates were designed. A lot of fates in the original game were built from a mechanical basis, but the fates that were often the most fun to explore were built kind of story first. And so as we were working on the outlines of new fates, it wasn't enough to just have a mechanical intervention. We actually had to find a story beat that we felt like wasn't being explored adequately in the base game, and then using that as the seed for a design that would follow. It all wasn't good news though. There were actually some places in our proposal where things that we thought were going to be pretty easy were proving to be fiendishly difficult. So one example is I batted around the idea of potentially doing a modular map or some kind of alternate board for ARCs. And my initial explorations reminded me how hard won ARCs' actual board is. Now, I think it might be possible to design alternate boards for ARCs, or certainly to design a modular map. I've seen some really good fan variants that do that. But it was plainly out of scope for this expansion. And that's something else that we paid a lot of attention to as we did this evaluation of all these expansion modules. Josh and I know that in order for us to keep to our business plan at Buried Giant, we have to have this project complete and to the printer, hopefully, by October of this year. That means as we went through this proposal, we had to be very mindful about the places where we saw extra labor being generated. So no modular map for now. Okay, so with that in mind, I want to talk to you a little bit about what this expansion is going to look like. We're going to be releasing 3 separate expansions for ARCs. It's our hope that these expansions are going to offer new options of play for both the base game and the campaign, and that players of all types are going to find a lot more in ARCs to explore. The first expansion is called ARCs, Lost Vaults, and Faded Leaders. This is an expansion directed entirely at players of the base game, although some of the content can be adapted to the campaign as well. So for instance, players, when they're setting up the board, can spawn a number of Lost Vaults. These Lost Vaults provide special properties to systems. And what you'll find is even though you're playing on the same ARCs map from game to game, it's going to feel like a different galaxy depending on which vaults start. These are going to create defensive hardpoints. They're going to provide opportunities for the introduction of new lore cards, perhaps. Some of these systems are going to be places that you'll be able to visit. Other systems will be things that you'll want to win and control. There's a huge variety of design here. We already have about 10 Lost Vaults, and players will find that their map-to-map variation is going to increase in really wonderful ways. This expansion also includes a new class of leaders called the Faded Leaders. These are leaders that draw on design elements that are in the campaign game, but repackage them in ways that offer some of those systems to players of the base game. The concept is pretty simple here. The idea is the Faded Leaders are ascended versions of the plot lines from the campaign game. So you're not just playing the Believer, you're playing a Believer who had just won a campaign. That means the game is starting with new action cards. Or perhaps you're playing as the Faded Leader that's based on the Gate Wraith. That means that for that single session game of ARCs, you're playing in a world that was created by that Gate Wraith, which means immortal ships blasting in and out of the Twisted Passage and all of those disruptions of play that are attendant to that fate. Now, these leaders are designed to be mixed and matched with the leaders in the base game. So if you want, you could play a game with 4 of these Ascended leaders. Do you want to play with Partisan Seizing, the special action cards, the Twisted Passage? All those things can be in play. In addition, players will find a fresh court deck with 31 new cards with new art and some of the best design that I've seen Josh do. Finally, we're introducing a 5th player to the game. Now, this was something that I had wanted to introduce very early on in ARCs, but early in ARCs' development, we ran into some problems. One, I knew that introducing a new player meant that we were going to have to design more fates, and we certainly didn't have time for that. The bigger problem, though, was that ARCs' action structure starts to stretch very thin when you get to high player counts. If we were to just introduce 8s and 9s, for instance, in the different suits, it would be possible that you would draw a mono-suited hand, or actually much more likely that you're drawing a mono-suited hand. So we just had to find a way to offset that. And what we've chosen to do is introduce a kind of action drafting system where players will always start with a special action card, which they can use to either draft or copy the cards that are played. This card also will have a wild ambition declare. So strangely, in the 5-player game, players are going to have a little bit more action flexibility than they might find in the 4-player game. Now, you might notice those new pink ships that you're looking at are screen printed. This is actually something that we had wanted to do for a long time, and I'm so happy that we're going to be able to apply screen printed piece designs to all of the player pieces in the base game. Now, this will be true starting with the first Buried Giant printing of ARCs, which is to say the game's 4th printing. And we realized some of you might feel a little left out, but we're going to make right. Because if you back the ARCs campaign, you will get a full set of screen printed wooden pieces for free as your free add-on. All right, so let's talk about the campaign expansions. We're doing 2 campaign expansions. The first one is called Beyond the Reach, and the second one is called Halls of Power. Each of these 2 campaign expansions is going to be in a little bit of a different product profile. The Halls of Power will probably be in a box about the size of Leaders and Lore, but maybe a little deeper. On the other hand, the Beyond the Reach campaign expansion is going to be in a box size pretty similar to the Lost Vaults and Faded Leaders expansion. Now, the reason we're doing this is we wanted to build in flexibility so that if we had plotlines that required specialized components, we had a product profile that could accommodate them. At the same time, we know that a lot of players of ARCS have only recently gotten into the Blighted Reach. They've just spent a lot of money to buy that expansion, and they might be looking for more plotlines to explore, more fates, but they don't want to get another big expansion. They would rather just buy a smaller box, something closer to a booster pack. Now, the Halls of Power is a smaller expansion. It's just going to be 4 or 5 different plot lines, and these are plot lines that are designed to accentuate the political elements of the game. You're going to be dealing with assassins and socialites and senators. This is for people who love the summit phase and want to see it grow in strange and new ways. Beyond the Reach is going to include about twice as many plot lines as that. And these plot lines are also going to introduce more dramatic revisions to the core game. They're going to include things like secret agendas, hidden identities, plot lines that introduce more pieces, maybe even a different color of combat die. This is all stuff that we had a hard time fitting into a small box, and so we decided to do 2 new product profiles for these campaign expansions. Critically, and I'll underline this again, everything will fit in your campaign box. We designed the campaign box with this wave of expansions specifically in mind, including some of the specialized components that we'd be introducing. So don't worry about that. Now, of course, we're going to be offering other stuff during the campaign as well. If you want, for whatever reason, to get the new Buried Giant printing of the game, you'll be able to back it and just get that printing. We also have a lovely neoprene mat and some other extras that are little surprises for launch day. All that stuff's going to be available as well. Next week, as we get ready to launch, we're going to be shifting how we use these video diaries. Now that you know what we're offering, we can spend a little bit of time talking aspirationally again. I want to talk about the ideas that have led to the new content. I also want to talk about the process of design when it comes to expansions. And after that, we're actually just going to start moving through the different fates, the different plot lines, in a very piecemeal fashion. We're going to spend time spotlighting hopefully every element of the game over the coming months, and we're going to bring you on along with us on the story of how this expansion came to be. And I hope that you support the campaign. I also hope you follow the conversation around how these games are built.